Why Ford and Chrysler quietly used GM's insane carb trick. Detroit built its identity on loyalty. Ford trusted Autolite. Chrysler trusted Carter. GM trusted Rochester. That loyalty wasn't just engineering preference, it was brand doctrine defended publicly and enforced quietly behind closed doors. In our previous episode, we covered the rise of the Rochester Quadrajet and how it quietly powered GM for decades. This story goes somewhere far less comfortable. Because in the late 1960s and early 1970s, as emissions tightened and fuel economy became a matter of survival, engineers inside Ford and Chrysler ran into a problem their own carburetors could not solve. And instead of rewriting physics, they did something Detroit would never admit out loud. They looked to GM. Adapter plates appeared. Test mules changed hands. What they found wasn't more power. It was something far more dangerous. Control. Intake castings told stories marketing never approved. Not for horsepower bragging rights, but because control efficiency and drivability suddenly mattered more than pride. This is the story of why Ford and Chrysler quietly used GM's Carb, and why they never wanted you to notice. GM even proved it by building a carburetor that looked like a 4-barrel but secretly worked as a 2-barrel. Ford and Chrysler saw that logic early, and it terrified them. By the late 1960s, Ford and Chrysler already had respected carburetors in production. Ford relied on the Autolite 4100, and later the 4300 and 4350 series. Chrysler leaned heavily on Carter designs like the AFB AVS and eventually the Thermoquad. On paper, none of these were bad carburetors. In the right application, they worked well. But once engines softened and heat soaked, those carburetors did not fail loudly. They failed quietly, inconsistent throttle drifting mixtures and cars that never felt the same twice. The problem was scale. These designs were built around fixed airflow assumptions. Each carb was tuned to a narrow band of engine size, compression ratio, and vehicle weight. As long as engines stayed consistent, that approach held. But once emissions pressure began creeping in during the late 1960s, everything shifted. Compression dropped. Camshafts softened. Engines were downsized and detuned sometimes year to year. Each change required a new calibration or an entirely new carburetor. And that constant redesign is what finally broke the system. Ford engineers like Tom Vaught and Chrysler calibration teams working closely with Carter found themselves constantly chasing moving targets. One carburetor could no longer serve multiple engine families efficiently without compromise. GM had already solved that problem. The Quadrajet was built around a different assumption, and that realization set the stage for some very quiet decisions. This is where the story gets uncomfortable. Between 1969 and 1971, Ford introduced the 429 Cobra Jet and Super Cobra Jet as part of the new 385 series big block family. On paper, they shared the same architecture. In reality, they were built for very different purposes, and that split exposed a problem Ford did not expect. The 429 Cobra Jet was engineered for street use. Heavy vehicles, tall rear gears, emissions, compliance, and daily drivability all mattered. With a hydraulic cam, moderate compression, and a factory rating of 370 horsepower, it needed clean part throttle control and stable airflow under load. The Super Cobra Jet was built for durability at high RPM using forged pistons and a solid lifter cam where sustained racing mattered more than manners. That difference dictated carburation. The Cobra Jet used a spread bore intake. The Super Cobra Jet stayed with a Holly square bore. Inside, Ford engineers under powertrain leadership figures like Herb Helbig, with calibration input from engineers such as Tom Vaught, recognized the issue quickly. Fixed CFM carburetors struggled on the Cobra Jet when paired with vehicle weight emissions tuning and real-world driving conditions. Quiet testing followed. Rochester Quadrajets were evaluated alongside Autolite spread bore derivatives and revised Holley calibrations. The Quadrajet's small primaries preserved air velocity during cruise maintaining signal where fixed CFM designs struggled. Fixed CFM carburetors struggled on the Cobra Jet when paired with vehicle weight emissions tuning and real-world driving conditions. Quiet testing followed. Rochester Quadrajets were evaluated alongside Autolite spread bore derivatives and revised Holley calibrations. The Quadrajet's small primaries preserved air velocity during cruise maintaining signal where fixed CFM designs struggled. The results were inconvenient. So inconvenient, in fact, that Ford never documented them publicly. Actual Rochester Quadrajets appeared on certain Cobra Jet and Police Interceptor configurations. Adapter plates surfaced on test mules. Intake castings were machined with spread bore capability even when a different carburetor was installed on the assembly line. And that single design choice is why Ford engineers quietly stopped trusting their own carburetors. This was the moment Ford learned something it never wanted to admit: control mattered more than brand loyalty. Publicly admitting a GM carburetor worked better for certain Ford applications would have damaged brand identity. So Ford stayed silent. Confusion was allowed to grow, documentation stayed fragmented, and enthusiasts argued for decades over what was real. That uncertainty was not accidental. It was intentional. And Chrysler was watching all of it unfold. Chrysler noticed everything Ford refused to explain. And they reached the same conclusion without ever bolting on a GM carb. Unlike Ford, Chrysler never publicly adopted the Rochester Quadrajet. And on the surface that seemed like proof, Mopar rejected it. Inside Chrysler engineering between the late 1960s and mid-1970s, the reality was far more calculated. They did not ignore the Quadrajet. They dissected it. Evidence appears in tooling and casting decisions. By the early 1970s, several Mopar intake castings were already machined with spread bore capability despite never advertising compatibility with GM hardware. Engineers were evaluating airflow control, not brand allegiance. The Quadrajet's ability to vary effective airflow from under 300 CFM at cruise to nearly 800 CFM at wide-open throttle was impossible to ignore, especially as emissions standards tightened after 1970. That logic directly influenced the Carter Thermoquad, developed under Chrysler powertrain leadership figures like Tom Hoover and calibration engineers working with Carter Carburetor Division. Introduced in 1971, the Thermoquad mirrored the Quadrajet's philosophy almost point for point. Small primaries maintained air velocity and throttle precision. Massive secondaries delivered airflow only when engine demand justified it. The phenolic plastic main body reduced heat soak, stabilizing fuel temperature and emissions consistency in high underhood temperature applications. Chrysler engineers understood the same constraint GM had already solved. One carburetor had to serve engines ranging from small block 318 to big block 440, while meeting fuel economy and emissions targets without constant redesign. So Chrysler did not copy GM hardware. They copied GM logic. And like Ford, they never explained why. But GM was already moving again. In 1973, the OPEC oil embargo collapsed Detroit's old rules overnight. Fuel economy became survival, not marketing. As Ford and Chrysler quietly studied and borrowed GM's carburetor logic, GM responded without panic. Instead of redesigning, they simplified. Rochester was ordered to strip the Quadrajet down, proving GM still controlled the airflow game even as rivals tried to catch up. What came next looked like a mistake. It wasn't. GM didn't just survive the oil crisis. They proved their logic by doing something no other automaker dared, removing half the carburetor and keeping control. GM's answer to the post-1973 chaos was not louder engineering. It was quieter, stranger, and far more confident. By 1976 to 1977, as downsizing accelerated and engines like the Pontiac 301 Oldsmobile 260, Pontiac 265, and Buick Small Block V8 filled GM's lineup. Rochester Products Division introduced something that made no sense by traditional carburetor logic: the early Rochester Dualjet. At first glance, it looked like a Quadrajet. Full-size spread bore casting, 4-barrel footprint, mounting points for secondaries that appeared ready to open. But that was the illusion. This is the part most people miss. GM didn't simplify the carburetor. They simplified the logic. Internally, GM engineers had removed the entire secondary system. No secondary air valve, no secondary metering rods, no secondary fuel circuit. The rear half of the carburetor existed only as cast aluminum, not as a functioning system. This was the trick. GM did not downsize the carburetor body first. They downsized the airflow logic. Instead of reverting to a traditional Rochester 2GC, Rochester engineers applied Quadrajet theory to its extreme. The tiny primary venturus generated exceptionally high air velocity and strong vacuum signal, allowing stable fuel metering on engines that barely revved past 4,000 RPM. In effect, GM proved that signal strength mattered more than total CFM. Because once you understand this, the rest of the industry's decisions stop making sense. On paper, the numbers looked absurd. A carburetor visually capable of 750 to 800 CFM was now feeding engines producing modest torque with lightweight internals like the Pontiac 301's 2-counterweight crankshaft or the Olds 403's hollow main webbing. But in real use, the Dualjet delivered clean throttle response, acceptable drivability, and emissions compliance where conventional 2-barrels struggled. Early versions even retained blocked-off secondary bores and gaskets designed only to seal the primary circuit. GM trusted their airflow math enough to leave the illusion intact. Enthusiasts later called it the Demi-Quadrajet. GM never did, and GM never explained it. Because once you understand what the Dualjet proved, it becomes clear this wasn't retreat or cost-cutting. It was GM demonstrating that they understood airflow deeply enough to remove half the carburetor and still stay in control. There was another reason GM never tried to turn Quadrajet into a universal product. The carburetor was too specific. Every Quadrajet was calibrated to a narrow window of engine load, gearing, vehicle weight, and emissions requirements. Change the application, and the carburetor had to change with it. That level of control made it unbeatable inside GM, but impossible to sell to the aftermarket. That was the real advantage Ford and Chrysler could see, but never replicate. Ford and Chrysler were boxed in by their own carburetor philosophies. Autolite and Carter designs relied on fixed airflow assumptions. Once emissions tightened and engines downsized, those systems could not be simplified without losing control. You could not remove circuits and still maintain stable drivability, mixture accuracy, and emissions compliance. There was no Autolite Dualjet, no Thermoquad Demi version. Their designs did not allow subtraction without collapse. As a result, Ford and Chrysler added layers instead of removing parts. More vacuum controls, feedback solenoids, early electronic correction stacked on top of mechanical systems that were already overstressed. This increased complexity, cost, and calibration sensitivity. By the late 1970s, they had little choice but to move faster toward electronic feedback carbs and early EFI, not because the technology was new, but because their mechanical foundations had reached a dead end. GM never faced that corner. Because Quadrajet logic was demand-based, not fixed flow, GM could go the opposite direction. Rochester proved they could delete entire secondary systems and still retain control. Dualjet was not a downgrade. It was a demonstration of authority. GM stayed mechanical longer because their airflow model still worked. Others ran because they had to. GM stayed because it could. This story was never really about a carburetor. It was about control. While Ford and Chrysler chased solutions, GM protected a philosophy. Quadrajet was not powerful because it flowed big numbers. It was powerful because it understood demand. When the rules changed, GM did not panic redesign or abandon mechanics. They simplified, removed, and proved their logic still worked. That is why rivals studied it quietly. That is why documentation stayed vague. And that is why arguments still rage decades later over what was factory, what was borrowed, and what was never meant to be seen. The Dualjet was not a mistake. It was a message. Once you understand why GM could delete an entire secondary system and still stay in control, the rest of Detroit's panic finally makes sense. It showed that GM could subtract hardware and still win the emissions war. Others had to add electronics to survive. GM did not. And once you see that, the real secret becomes clear. Detroit did not lose the carburetor era at the same time. Some companies ran out of ideas. One company ran out the clock. If this surprised you, that means it worked. It was never supposed to be obvious. If this kind of hidden engineering history is what you love, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment below. Tell us which forbidden factory trick you want uncovered next.